Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start our program shortly, but before we do that, I want to thank you for joining us for City Club of Eugene. Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's July 14th program, What Did the Oregon 2023 Legislature Accomplish? My name is Joel Corin. I'm the City Club's Program Committee Chair. Today, City Club comes to you live from the 5th Street Market District in the heart of downtown Eugene. And it's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our speakers and to all of you joining us in person, online, or over the radio. For 3 decades, City Club has maintained dedicated to its founding mission to build community vision through open inquiry. In accordance with our mission and purpose, we hope to help connect people throughout our community and across generations, identities, experiences, and perspectives. You are invited this week and every week to join us in this effort, to share your wisdom, learn something new, and take active steps to make a difference in the city and the region that we love. Of course, we cannot do this work alone. Special thank you to our Platinum Community and Diamond sponsors, Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable health care and to improve the health of our members and communities we serve. More information at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly and creatively, and live ethically since 1876. More information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare provider for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, lanecc.edu. And thank you to the City of Eugene and Lane County for their support. Whether you're joining us for the first time or a long-time listener, I invite you to support our work by becoming an individual member, a business or community sponsor, or to support the idea for, suggest the idea for an upcoming program. You can do all of these things and more at cityclubofeugene.org. And of course, City Club isn't just conversation. It's about taking that conversation and translating it into action. It's our hope that with informed understanding, you'll engage the issues impacting our community. The program coordinator for today's program is John Belcher, who will introduce the program.
Thank you, Joel. Despite an amendment to the Oregon Constitution designed to prevent it, 10 Republican senators staged a 6-week walkout during this year's legislative session. But they returned on June 15th after the Democrats and Republicans reached compromise. The parties agreed to ease provisions in House Bill 2002, the reproductive health care bill, and dropped a proposed constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to same-sex marriage, abortion, and gender-affirming care. Also dropped were some of more stringent controls on gun possession, but as a result, in the remaining 10 days before sine die, several significant bills were passed, including a state budget for the next 2 years, which is kind of important. Also, these bills await Governor Kotek's signature, including giving voters a decision in 2024 to allow impeachment of statewide elected officials, allowing ranked choice voting in Oregon, also on the 2024 ballot, restructuring the public defender system, including additional funding, ending the prohibition on self-serve gasoline, leaving New Jersey as the sole remaining state prohibiting it. Stricter rent control measures, including an lower annual rate increase allowed to 10%, $200 million for housing and homeless crises, $100 million additional funding for state schools, a ban on styrofoam restaurants to-go packaging, banning ghost guns and providing funding for gun violence prevention programs, directing the Department of Energy to develop a comprehensive energy strategy, and most importantly, we now have the potato as our state vegetable. Some bills that failed to pass include limits to campaign contributions, easing of regulations for approving housing projects, expanding urban growth boundaries for housing, renewed funding for the Oregon Crime Victim Law Center, and of course the devil is in the details. So rather than have me list these bills, why not ask the legislators themselves to give us the backstory of another tumultuous legislative session? We have recruited 2 local House members to give us their perspective on what did and didn't work in this year's session. We will hear from a seasoned leader, Representative Julie Fahey, as well as a first-termer, Representative Charlie Conrad. Allow me to introduce them to you. And if you guys would like to come up and have a seat, that would be great. Our first speaker will be Charlie Conrad. He represents Oregon's House District 12, which is Eastern Lane County and Junction City. This session, he served on the House Committee on Behavioral Health and Healthcare, Judiciary and Emergency Management, General Government, and Veterans. He describes himself as a moderate Republican and generated a bit of press when he voted in favor of House Bill 2002, which protects access to abortion and expands insurance coverage for gender-affirming care. His interim priorities will be working to understand and improve the juvenile behavior and mental system, and to improve emergency response, specifically trying to find ways to increase the number of volunteer firefighters in rural areas. He's a longtime resident of Dexter and has been a Lane County Corrections officer, Springfield police officer, a researcher for the League of Oregon Cities, and worked for Lane County Parks and Lane Events Center. He has also served as a Lane County Planning Commissioner. He will be followed by Julie Fahey, Oregon House District 14 representative, who is serving her 4th term representing West Eugene and Veneta. She's the House Majority Leader, Chair of the House Committee on Rules, and serves on the Joint Committee on Legislative Administration and the House Committee on Housing and Homelessness, which she previously chaired. Her priorities include protecting Oregon's environment, investing both in career and technical education as well as higher education, resolving our homelessness and housing crises, and providing health care for all. So I'm going to get out of the way and let Charlie come up and tell you something interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I thank you all very much, and thank you for having me here and inviting me. I'm excited to be here. This is my first one of these, so it's something I've been looking forward to being able to do. What I would like to do is talk a little bit about the perspective as a freshman legislator and the process that I went through going through this session. And some of that will be followed up by some of the priorities, some of the things that I think we still need to work on. We did some work this session on it, but I think we have a number of areas throughout the state that we can continue to work on and make some progress. I do have some bill numbers in my presentation, but I've tried to minimize that to not bore you with House bill numbers, but I did include some for reference. What I would like to do is to begin with one of my favorite quotes. I'd like to share that with you because it is particularly salient to today's discussion, because to me it adeptly describes what I see as the continual challenge for legislators and legislatures as well. The death of a man is a tragedy. The death of 1 million men is a statistic. I frequently think about this quote because it helps me remember the lens and scope are necessary filters in developing, evaluating, implementing effective public policy. Even though we at the legislature represent 4.2 million Oregonians, I always try to remember that they are people with lives, hopes, dreams, friends, family. Reflecting on this quote helped keep me grounded throughout the session as we discussed large-scale public policy and budgets with lots of zeros. To help out for a little bit with scope, again, I was a research coordinator for League of Oregon Cities. I like data, I like numbers. Share a couple with you. These are unofficial, so the word approximate is in front of all of them. But there were 2,970 measures introduced by both chambers, both the House and the Senate. 775 measures came to the House floor for a vote. 616 measures passed both chambers. That's a lot of legislation, a lot of bills that went forward. Going into this session, I did have some awareness and familiarity with what to expect from my previous jobs. And I'll tell you that it fully lived up to my expectations. You know, standing here today, I could best describe it as an unforgettable life experience. One that provided a significant opportunity for personal growth. The workload was enormous at times. Many of the discussions were thought-provoking and in-depth. You know, simply trying to wrap my head around healthcare economics and the impact of altering culpable mental states on prosecuting criminal cases, those aren't light topics. You can't easily digest them. The workload and discussions also challenged me personally. You know, certainly my reading comprehension and retention was put to the test. Trying to learn and understand as much as I could in such a compressed time frame, it really forced me to work on my decision-making processes as the session progressed. And in addition to testing my mental faculties, my values, integrity, and character were also challenged at times, as I had to evaluate where I truly stood philosophically and ideologically in certain topics. You know, I enjoyed the challenges and opportunities each of the phases of the session brought. Back in January and February when it first started and the volumes of bills were low, you know, I held a lot of meetings. I got to know lobbyists and organizations, priority issues for the district and community, and got to know my colleagues. There were times when I and my staff suffered mental whiplash, as we had back-to-back-to-back meetings, you know, talking about issues ranging from pharmacy benefit managers to wildfire recovery, hospital staffing issues, youth incarceration programs, land use, and then the scope of podiatry. Didn't know that was going to be a conversation for me this session, but it was. You know, as the session progressed and committees began meeting, you know, I began getting better at filtering the issues, and I was able to refine my focus and attention on the bills that were on the agendas upcoming, and those issues that specifically impacted my district. You know, and I was fortunate that with the committees I was on, that there were a lot of overlapping issues. And again, my committees were judiciary, behavioral health and healthcare, and then emergency management, veterans, and general government, which was all one committee. In addition to delving into the complex issues to arrive at opinions in learning the legislative process, freshman legislators, we are also tasked with getting to know our colleagues and developing relationships with them. As the season progressed and as I got to know many of them, I came to truly appreciate them as professionals and as people. You know, developing personal relationships with my fellow members, particularly the other freshmen, helped me throughout the entire session as we did learn together. The veteran members were instrumental in expanding my learning, expediting my learning process, and both in understanding the issues and also the processes. A common question during my campaign was how would I work to close the partisan divide? I am happy to report that at the personal individual level, there isn't much of a divide. Although we disagree on policies, there is a lot of mutual respect, and we engaged in cordial and thoughtful conversations. There's a common understanding between legislators that we represent districts with different needs, different viewpoints, constituencies, and this oftentimes formed the basis for the beginning of conversations. How does this affect your district? You know, I mentioned a few minutes ago about refining my decision-making process, and that will continue to be a work in progress. With the sheer number of bills being discussed in committees and on the floor, and the ability to grasp the problem being addressed, the appropriateness of the solution, and the resulting impacts in difficult policy areas that I'm not familiar with, creates a challenge. As time progressed and I read and evaluated more and more bills, I learned to focus on the key aspects depending on what the bill did. And this guided my questions and evaluation. You know, is this a new program? Is it eliminating a program? Is it changing the word may to shall, which can have significant ramifications? Who opposes it and who supports it? What are their arguments? Whose arguments do you give more weight to? For me, the trick was, and will continue to be, learning how to identify the information needed to make that informed decision. Because there is so much more information out there that you could digest. Evaluating and working to understand the bill just leads to the next step in the process, which is deciding whether you're going to support or oppose it. Those are your only two options. It's a yes or a no. You can't abstain on a vote, both in the committee and on the floor. Voting is easy when the district needs and my conscience align. It makes it an easy vote. The issues come up when they don't align, and that is when your values, your integrity, and your character really are tested, because again, you have to say yes or no. Or are you going to side with that? A couple of examples of this that I want to highlight. One difficult decision that I wrestled with, but ultimately I didn't have to make that decision because the bill didn't make it to a work session in time. But it was Senate Bill 862, which would have permitted owners of self-storage facilities that were selling the personal property in the storage facilities due to default on payment and had a lien against it to advertise on a public website as opposed to in local newspapers. It was difficult because I support local newspapers. I understand they need to remain profitable. I support transparency, and I also support public notice. Those are all things that are good, and I support those. But I also support small businesses. I understand their need to remain profitable. I understand their need to be efficient. Before and after the public hearing on this, I was contacted by both groups in my district. I had conversations with them. Both of them had good points to support and oppose. I struggled with what would be really a simple bill. I struggled with it because of the philosophy and the ideology behind it. Two groups that I support. I don't want to create a winner. How do I resolve this issue? And frankly, I don't know what I would have said till I said it. I still don't know what my vote would have been. It would have been the word that I said at the time in committee. Another bill that I struggled with was Senate Bill 787, which would have made it an assault 3, which is a felony, to assault a public transit vehicle operator while acting in the course of their official duties. The current verbiage in the statute, and I quote, says, in control of operating the vehicle, end quote. That has been interpreted that the bus has to be in motion. So if a bus driver is assaulted, the bus is in motion, it's an automatic felony, it's an assault 3. The bill that was proposed would have changed that verbiage to, quote, acting in the course of their official duties. A subtle but very important change. And I mention this because this is an example where I support the concept, but I'm not sure if it's, no pun intended, the right vehicle to get that concept out there. So part of my refining my decision-making process, it is looking at and comparing the validity of the concept to the bill. Words matter. It was mentioned earlier, details matter. Bus drivers throughout the state, especially in Portland and here in Eugene, interact daily with passengers who are increasingly more dangerous and unpredictable. Their work environment is riskier, and many are leaving the profession. I want to support them, and I want it to support the industry. My primary concern with this bill, and I think we could have gotten to a solution, is that there is a significant difference to the public safety when a bus driver is being assaulted when the bus is in motion versus when a bus is stopped and a bus driver is standing outside. And to me, that is an important difference when you're going to go with different levels of crime between a misdemeanor and a felony. And I think we could have had a resolution to that. But this bill ultimately didn't get a work session. And one of the reasons why is because we had two other professions that also had bills that when their workers were assaulted, they also wanted it to be assault 3 felony. And so the decision that Chair Kropf, who's chair of the Judiciary Committee, and I agree with his decision, is to go back and to look at the assault 3 statute and see if there is a better phrase, a better way that we can handle that so when people are assaulted in their workplace environment, that it's going to be that felony. What makes sense? So instead of having each occupation come individually with legislation, let's look at that holistic approach. Let's look and see what we can do for all workers that are facing this. I do want to take time to mention a couple of things that I'm very excited for. Being a first time through, there were a couple requests that I made for money for my district that got approved. The first one was $360,000 for the city of Lowell to improve their wastewater treatment system, which was on the verge of failure. So I'm excited for that. The other one I'm excited for, it is $143,000 to Row River Fire Response to help them get equipment and training so that if Row River area has a fire this summer, that they're going to be better prepared for that. So I'm very excited I was able to help with that. I do have a bill that I co-chief sponsored that is sitting on the governor's desk. So my fingers are crossed that she's actually going to sign it. It's House Bill 3362. And what this does, it helps out a couple folks that live in Marcola who purchased property that had been fraudulently created unbeknownst to them by the previous landowner. So what it would do, make those legal lots for them. So a couple people in Marcola legislation, again, getting back to that perspective, this is about people. That's what we're working to. And going forward, some of the common themes that I want to just make mention of and that stand out that, as I mentioned before, we did some progress, but we have more work to do. The first one is workforce shortages all throughout our economy, but specifically we had a couple related to healthcare provider occupations, which are all, there are so many openings in that area, those professions that we need to work through. There were two bills that we went through to try to address this. One of them was House Bill 2697, and the other one was 2665. And unfortunately, my take on these bills is that one of them, 2697, functionally increases the demand for more nurses in hospitals, while 2665 likely will decrease the supply. So at the same time we're increasing the demand, we're likely decreasing the supply. That, I think, will exacerbate the issue. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully we'll have some better opportunities in that area so that we can hire nurses, we can hire the medical professionals that we need. Just touching through quickly on some of the other ones, workforce shortages, deputy district attorneys, public defenders, police officers. We did some work in that session with this. We'll need to do a lot more with that. Also, workforce shortages, as mentioned, with volunteer firefighters that impact our ability to respond to conflagrations. Improving the state's emergency response recovery system. Again, fixing the broken mental and behavioral health system, particularly for juveniles. Addressing issues at state hospital, the working conditions at the state hospital. Southern Oregon has huge issues with human trafficking. We need to be able to address human trafficking more. And then obviously homelessness and housing issues, which are going to be prevalent for a while. So those are a few issues that I see going forward that we're going to have to continue to address. We'll be able to pick away at them, and hopefully we'll make some good progress in the interim and then go into the short and then the next long session. I thank you all very much. And now Representative Julie Fahey.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Representative Conrad. I'm Julie Fahey. I am the state representative for West Eugene and Veneta, and I also have the honor of serving as the House Majority Leader in the Oregon House. And I think it's really appropriate that we heard from Representative Conrad first, as a first-term member in the legislature, because the 2023 session that just wrapped up a few weeks ago was definitely one of transition. We have 60 members in the Oregon House, and for 26 of them, this was their first long session in the House. So we have, every other year, we have a long session and a short session. So over 40% of the House members this was the first long session that they had gone through. So lots of learning, lots of mentorship, lots of bringing people along the way. We also, there are 6 key legislative leadership positions in the building. There's the Senate Democratic leader and Republican leader in the Senate and the House. There's the Senate President, and there's the Speaker of the House. For all 6 of those folks, including me as the House Democratic leader, it was our first long session in those roles. And we have a new governor and all of the transition that brings along with new agency heads, new priorities, and new approaches to managing state government. So I cannot overstate the amount of transition that was happening in the building this year. Add to that, we were transitioning out of a pandemic and out of sort of 3 years of dealing with various crises, the wildfires, the pandemic, extreme weather, heat, ice storms. And so this was really a chance for us to come together and regroup and focus on the most important things that were issues that are facing the state of Oregon right now. And the session was definitely not without its challenges. There was a 6-week walkout from the Senate Republicans. But I am pretty proud of how we were able to get everything back on track, and in the last few weeks pass a tremendous number of things that will benefit Oregonians and really make a real difference in their lives. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work in each of these areas. I'm going to try to not, as Representative Conrad said, there were over 600 bills that we passed. So I'm going to try to not do a laundry list, and I'm sure I will miss some things that people in this room care about, so excited for the Q&A. I do also just want to say, as I run through some of these things, 95% of the bills that passed through both chambers were bipartisan. And many of those things, some of the things that Representative Conrad mentioned, are issues that don't get coverage in the media because this, self-storage is not an issue that people are really going to be excited to cover in the newspapers, but they're really important to someone in the state of Oregon and how we function as a government. So I think that's a thing that people sort of forget, is that most of the work we do is just the basic block and tackling of running state government in Oregon. So this session, we organized our work into a number of different issue buckets: housing and homelessness, behavioral health care and addiction treatment, community safety, education, K-12 schools, including a strong focus on early literacy this year, legislation to combat the climate crisis, in particular drawing down federal funds focused on green infrastructure, economic development, again, federal funds for the semiconductor industry were, and for various broadband and different types of infrastructure were available to us. Consumer protection, expanding access to healthcare, including reproductive healthcare, and strengthening our democracy given all of the things we're seeing going on around the country. So I'm going to touch on each of those things and then happy to answer questions during the Q&A period. On housing and homelessness, this is sort of my personal issue of passion. I was the previous chair of the housing committee in the House, and I sometimes describe myself as a housing policy nerd. It's my favorite area to get in the details on. I just very strongly believe that our lack of housing supply in Oregon is driving our homelessness crisis, is making housing unaffordable for too many working families. So we need to build more housing in the state. And this session, we did a number of things that will help make that happen, including investments in building affordable housing and changes to some policies that will be really important in unlocking new supply. When we came into the session, we passed our first major piece of legislation that we passed was the bipartisan Housing and Emergency Homelessness Response Package. The governor, on her very first full day in office, declared a state of emergency and did 3 executive orders on the topic of housing, expanding housing production, and addressing our homelessness crisis. And the legislature needed to fund those priorities and make sure that that money could get out the door and be implemented in our communities as quickly as possible. Those investments included $15 million going to Lane County that can be used for shelter and services specifically in Lane County. To help get people off the streets and connected to services and on the path out of homelessness. We also focused on addressing some of the root causes of homelessness in that package, specifically youth homelessness. Youth homelessness is the #1 predictor of whether someone will be homeless as an adult, and eviction prevention work. And of course, focusing on increasing the supply of housing, which is the root cause of all of this at the end of the day. We also focused on improving our behavioral health care and addiction treatment system. Through investments to increase the number of residential treatment facilities that are available and expand the workforce. That included the Lane County legislators coming together and advocating for $5 million to go to the county to create a new behavioral health stabilization center here in our community. We also passed an opioid harm reduction package, which will help save lives, get Narcan and other materials into the hands of people to help save their lives. And the 988 crisis line, the suicide prevention and behavioral health crisis line, we stood up that crisis line and provided stable funding to make sure that that very important resource for Oregonians in need has the resources that they need. We know that climate-fueled disasters, extreme heat, wildfires are threatening our very life in Oregon, our way of life in Oregon. And so this session, we focused on passing the climate resilience package, which will both make sure the buildings that we build are more energy efficient, climate friendly, and will help us pull down federal funds for green infrastructure and things like heat pumps that both drive down energy costs for working families and make our built environment more climate friendly. One of the most important duties that the legislature has is making sure that our K-12 schools have the resources they need to be successful. And this session, thanks to a surprisingly good revenue forecast for the next few years, we were able to deliver a $10.2 billion state school fund, record levels of investment. It's about a 10% increase over our last budget cycle. And one of the things that I'm particularly proud of is the focus on early literacy. We invested $140 million to make sure that schools and educators have what they need to teach our kids to read in evidence-based ways. When we know better, we do better, and the research is saying that the ways that we are teaching children how to read in this country, we need to adapt, we need to adjust. And so that's what we did with the early literacy package that we passed. We also, Representative Conrad mentioned workforce. Obviously, workforce in our education system is a significant issue as well, and so we made some investments into expanding our workforce and to joining the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact so that when teachers move from other states, it'll be easier for them to get licensed. To make our community safer, we banned ghost guns. These are undetectable, untraceable firearms, things like 3D printed guns, that often people who are legally prohibited from owning firearms, they're the ones who are possessing those types of firearms. We invested in community-based violence prevention programs that help break the cycle of violence when there has been a shooting, and we also serve the victims of violence to work to reduce future crime and arrests and emergency room visits. We also, a lot of attention has been paid to our public defense system. We made significant improvements to that system and investments to make sure that people could access their constitutional right to a legal defense. To support our working families, we did a number of things. So we passed the first ever state child tax credit in Oregon. We saw what happened at the federal level in the last few years when they passed the child tax credit at the federal level. Child poverty rates declined substantially. Child tax credits are proven ways to get money into the hands of families and reduce the amount of child poverty in our state. So I was really proud. It's $1,000 a year child tax credit, and it's going to put money in the hands of struggling families. We also invested in expanding our child care system and made sure we could expand facilities and support the workforce there. From an economic development standpoint, we saw a very clear opportunity to create good-paying jobs in this state. The federal government, led by the leadership of Senator Wyden, passed the CHIPS Act, which provided federal funding to expand the semiconductor industry in the states. And there were some things that our state needed to do to be able to pull down and access that funding. And that was the second piece of major legislation that we passed this session. Oregon is a leader in the semiconductor industry, and we're very well positioned to attract investment from those companies and create good-paying jobs. We also passed a rural economic development and infrastructure package to focus on building infrastructure and housing and investing in those industries that are important in our rural areas. On the consumer protection side, we passed a privacy bill that will help protect privacy of Oregonians online, especially those children under the age of 15. We passed a bill cracking down on scam robocalls, which was a very cool little piece of policy. And then on access to healthcare, we talked a little bit about workforce issues that our healthcare system is facing, and so we passed a bill with requiring staffing requirements for hospitals and investing in building up our workforce. And we passed a couple of bills on prescription drug prices, regulating pharmacy benefit managers, which are the middlemen of the prescription drug industry. After Roe v. Wade was overturned, we really came together and said we need to look at how can we ensure that both the rights and the access that Oregonians had to accessing abortion are protected in the future, and that our healthcare providers are protected if they are providing abortions to people who are coming from out of state. So we passed House Bill 2002, which will protect the rights to those. The rights that we had before Roe, protect our providers, and will close insurance gaps, including for gender-affirming care. And the last topic that I'll touch on is something that is near and dear to my heart as the chair of the Rules Committee this session, which the Rules Committee is sort of a catch-all committee, but it has to do with government, democracy, elections. And so I helped shepherd an agenda through the legislature this year focused on strengthening our democracy. When we look around the country and see our institutions under attack and trust in government at an all-time low, we knew we needed to have a clear policy agenda focused on that area this session. So we passed bills focused on ensuring free and fair elections, on expanding access to the ballot. We are hoping to expand our automatic voter registration system from the DMV to the Oregon Health Plan, because there are many Oregonians who are on the Oregon Health Plan but don't interact with the DMV on a regular basis. We also instituted key ethics and accountability reforms in the state. We referred a couple of different ballot measures, as John mentioned, to the ballot. One that would create an impeachment process for statewide elected officials. Oregon is the only state in the country that does not have an impeachment process. And so next year, voters will be asked to approve a constitutional amendment that will create that impeachment process, and provide another tool for holding politicians accountable. We also referred to the voters a constitutional amendment that would create an independent salary commission to set salaries for statewide electeds, legislatures, judges, and DAs. This will help make sure that politicians can't set their own salaries. And that when decisions are made about what the salary of the governor or the attorney general has the lowest salary in the state, that those will be made in evidence-based ways, and we can take politics out of that decision. And there were other, we passed a bill referring ranked choice voting to the voters. So voters will have a choice next year about whether ranked choice voting is something that we want to institute in this state. So overall, despite the fact that the session was shut down for 6 weeks, the House really, we stayed the course and we delivered on the things that mattered to Oregonians the most. And I really believe that the things that we passed this session will help make Oregon a better place to live, work, and raise a family. And I just want to close by saying I really appreciated serving with Representative Conrad this session. I think our government is better served when we have people who understand, who are very thoughtful about their approach to policymaking, and who understand that very few of the issues that we address in the legislature are black and white. There's rarely, you're rarely 100% sure that this is the right path to solve this problem. And oftentimes there's real commitment that we should solve this specific problem around housing supply or homelessness. And there's just disagreement about how to go about doing that, or whether a particular solution can actually be implemented by local governments or by school districts or by the service providers that we rely on. And so I just appreciate, regardless of party, Democrat, Republican, when people are very thoughtful and recognize that state legislatures are working bodies. We are required to pass a budget for a 2-year cycle. We have to address issues like the wildfires that come up. We're not like Congress. We can't just tweet about things and fight all day long. We actually have to do the work. And so I really respect when there are people who are willing to do that work and understand that the state legislature is a working body whose job is to improve the lives of Oregonians. So thank you.
Well, those two make you proud to be Oregonians, don't you? Thank you, Representative Conrad and House Majority Leader Fahey, for joining us today at City Club. We will begin the question and answer period in a short period of time. But first I have to thank some sponsors. Network Charter School, Hirschner Hunter LLC, Evans, Elder, Brown, and Subert. And also thanks to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, PacInfo and Simplified Computing, LLC, Dotson Photography, Ninkasi Better Living Room, and Claim 52. Also a special thanks to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC 89.7, for airing City Club programs on Monday nights at 7 o'clock. We'll take a brief break and return for the question and answer period. Thanks. Okay, we're back live. Excuse me. We're back live and ready for questions. I have the timer. Mary?
Mary Layton, City Club member since 2006. Charlie, Julie, what changes would you make in the current formal and informal arrangements in the legislature to optimize the usefulness of party affiliations for achieving worthy goals while preserving the important role of individual legislators' relevant knowledge and skills in decision-making? As you both know from events in this session and the last, an individual whose knowledge and experience, not to mention the conversations with colleagues in the session, leads to a vote that is different from what the party recommends, can expect to be shunned, recalled, or gerrymandered out of office by their own party or former allies. That seems a waste of talent and commitment to public service. What do you think we can do to fix that structurally?
Thank you. Who wants to go first?
There are a lot there. Hopefully I cover most of what your question was. One of the things that happens at the beginning of session, particularly at the outset, was meeting with the speaker. And he's the one that puts folks on committees, and understanding the background, understanding your profession, understanding your interest, and understanding the needs in your district. So in looking at trying to maximize the ability and the potential for somebody to be successful, to pursue their interest, and to benefit their district, that happens. That's a good thing, and I think that needs to continue to happen. I think, with some of the other informal issues, one of the things that struck me, particularly coming in for the first time, so folks like Representative Fahey who are in multiple terms, they've had years to develop. They know the processes, they've got a plan, they've got the agenda. Coming in for the first time, it's tough to insert yourself into somebody else's agenda that's been going on for 4 or 5, 6 years. So on an informal way, some way to some way to incorporate new legislators into some of those agendas, some of those discussions going early on. Many of the bills, particularly some of these packages that came through, they're brand new to somebody like myself, and trying to understand that history, and to not have the same conversations that have been going on for a couple years, just because I'm trying now to catch up to speed and to learn it. So I think there are some things that we can do in that orientation process. There are some things we can do in that lead-up process between the election and between actually being sworn in, to really try and bring people up to speed on some of those key issues, and to ferret out what is the best committee for you, what can you do to be successful, and how can you really represent your people. So hopefully I touched on some of the issues.
Julie?
Thank you. I think there's a lot there in that question, and I would just say a couple of things. One, I think the importance of relationships in the Capitol can't be overstated. And I think that's relationships within parties, and it's relationships between parties. And that, to me, when I took over this job, my framework for that was, it was very important for the Speaker and I to develop relationships at the leadership level with our Republican counterpart, Leader Brees Iverson. But it was also, and that happened through pretty basic ways, right? Regular meetings where we talked about, and clear communication about what was going on and what was going well and what wasn't going well. But it also happened through relationships between individual members. So we, on various issues, on housing, supply, we had Representative Helfrich from Hood River and Representative Dexter from the Portland area. They worked, Republican and Democrat worked very well together on the housing package. On water issues, Representative Owens from Eastern Oregon and Representative Helm from Washington County. They were sort of the water team and the drought team this year. And so I think building those individual relationships at the individual member level and at the leadership level help us work together across parties in a more effective way. And that ties into sort of my overall leadership philosophy, which is I think we make better decisions at the state level when we disagree with each other, which is a little surprising, maybe coming from a Democratic majority leader. But I think that disagreement happens across parties, and it also happens within parties. So I told my caucus many times, we need to hear what your perspectives on these bills are. If you disagree with one of your colleagues who's proposed a bill that maybe you don't think works, we need to hear it. Because rather than just sort of going along to getting along and passing someone's great idea, our job is to vet the bills that come before us and to poke at them and make sure that they are actually good policy that can make a difference. And so I think understanding, having a leadership philosophy that disagreement is important both between parties and within parties, and also respecting the expertise of your colleagues. So I don't know anything very much about the criminal justice system. I'm not an attorney. I've never worked in the system. And so I rely very strongly on people like Representative Krupp, who is the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Representative Conrad, who has a law enforcement background. Respecting people's expertise is also an incredibly important piece of that.
Betty?
Thank you. Betty Taylor, City Club member since 1990. My question is, with the changes in the legislature, is there any chance of repealing House Bill 2001 from a previous session, which contributes to the destruction of affordable housing through allowing duplexes, fourplexes, sixplexes in net residential neighborhoods, and also leads to the deterioration of neighborhood relationships? Thank you.
Well, speaking of disagreement, I was one of the sponsors of that bill, and we just don't see eye to eye on the importance of middle housing in this state. House Bill 2001 was a bill that was passed in the 2019 session that encourages the development of what's called middle housing, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. They are just incredibly important pieces of solving our housing supply crisis. Gives people housing choices in the types of housing that they, as people age and they want a smaller home, or as young families. When my husband and I were a young couple, just starting out, we would have loved to have bought a single family home near our house with a big yard for our dog, but we couldn't afford that in our 20s. And so we bought a 1 unit in a 4-unit building. And there are too many, that type of housing supply does not exist as much in this state as it needs to. And so the purpose of that bill was to encourage different kinds of housing to be built. So it's not just only single family homes, that there are more choices in this state. So I don't see a path for repealing that legislation. I think it's something that will solve, 0.5% of our housing crisis, but every little thing that we have done in the last decade to try and solve the housing crisis will solve a small percentage of it, and we just have to keep doing all of those things around workforce and building affordable housing and preserving affordable housing and reducing red tape and permitting reform and some land use things. We have to do all of those things. We are in deep enough that we have to address that policy at all those different levels.
Charlie, do you have a comment on it?
There's no way I could top that.
Okay. Roz?
Oh, okay. Roz Stein, City Club member. When you talked about ghost guns, I thought, I stopped there and I couldn't get past it because that doesn't seem like much. And I mean, this is a thing that's going on all over the United States. I mean, just terrifying things going on with guns. Everyone would agree with that. But I thought, that seems like that's not very much. Is this the beginning of a push for greater, gun safety in this state, or just some little thing? That's all I could think of, and I just wondered where we're going with that, and how you're both feeling about it, and what do you see going on? Thanks.
Well, I'll go first, and then I want to hear from Representative Conrad as well. I think the important context to keep in mind is over the last 7 to 8 years, just about every legislative session, the legislature has passed a gun safety measure. We've made slow and steady progress, sort of advancing the ball down the field 5-10 yards at a time. So we passed a bill requiring universal background checks, including background checks at gun shows and private deals. We passed what's known as an extreme risk protection order, where people who are judged to deem to be a threat to themselves or others can be temporarily dispossessed of their firearms. Obviously, the voters passed Measure 114 last session, or last election, which has a number of really important gun safety measures that the legislature tried to tweak and make more implementable this session. So I think the slow and steady progress in Oregon is something that's really important to keep in mind, especially when you look relative to other states. The original proposals in House Bill 2005 were to ban ghost guns, and importantly, to raise the age of purchase from 18 to 21. You already have to be 21 to buy a handgun. For raising the age of purchase from 18 to 21 for more types of guns, I thought would be an important safety measure given the rise of mass shootings in this country. There were exceptions in the bill for law enforcement and military and hunting rifles, that sort of thing. Ultimately, we compromised with the Republicans to make sure we could actually end the session and pass budgets and all of the other things that we did. And we passed the ghost guns part of that bill and not the age part of that bill. So would I love to have passed the bill as it was envisioned? Yes, I would have. But I know that the policies we passed in past sessions and Measure 114 will help us make progress on the issue of keeping everyone safe from gun violence.
Yeah, to echo one of the things that Representative Fahey mentioned earlier, it's sometimes the best policy comes when you disagree. And this is certainly one of those issues where there's disagreement. My district, even though it is very diverse, I've got part of the South Hills of Eugene. I go up to Oak Ridge, down to Cottage Grove, up to Junction City. So it's very rural, very diverse, but also some of the incorporated city limits of Eugene as well. And again, back to my comments, this is the difficulty of how do I represent all 54,000+ people in this district, given that they're all along the entire spectrum. The district, and I heard a lot from my constituents about those bills. There were originally 3. They were consolidated into 2005, opposing them. I did hear people in my district that supported them. I think there's broad acknowledgement that we need to do something with the mass shootings in the state. The issues come about is that we don't have a solid solution that is acceptable to everybody. There is a conversation that we really need to have, and this topic, along with some of the other topics, are the polarizing topics that we have to work through, and we've got to find it. If you were trying to force something down the throats of a good portion of the population that is not acceptable to them, it's just going to polarize our state more. It's going to make some of the other policies, some of the other conversations we have, that much more difficult. So with this, it is something that I agree with Representative Fahey, we're going to have to chip away with. We've got to tackle it as we can, as there is appetite and agreement on what a good step is going to do. But to just do a wholesale large bill that's going to do X, it is going to be very difficult, it's going to be very contentious, and it's going to further divide our state. So while we need to do things, and I think we all agree we need to do something with that, we've got to do it in a measured process. We have to have it be thoughtful, and we have to work at the same table together. It's got to be all the groups, all the folks coming and representing their points of view, so that the final bill that gets passed, we get buy-in and we don't get further division, because I think that's going to be detrimental to the entire process.
Did I understand you to say that you can't buy a handgun until you're 21? Is that the law here now? But you now can buy an AR-15 at 18?
Some of the bills, and I'll touch on it, and I always yield to Representative Fahey on the technical. She's been doing this a lot longer than I have. Some of the bills, again, it's concept versus what the bill actually says. And some of the bills, at least from my caucus, from my constituents, the legality and the constitutionality of some of the verbiage in there, and the way that some of the guns and the parts of the guns were described, that there were some technical issues, at least perceived by some of the folks in my district and my caucus, that they did not agree with on that. So broad statement, yes, but when you get to the technical, try to describe what pieces and parts need to be serialized, for instance, details matter. Do you have anything to add to that?
Okay.
Betsy Pownell, City Club member as of last week. I'm going to mirror the question. I think you've already answered it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. 1 out of 5 constitutional rights that children have is a right to safety. This year, starting in 2020, children's major cause of death is by gun violence. So, and I'm a mental health professional. I have adolescents in my practice they present like veterans did when I worked at the VA. They're so terrified to be in school. I have a 15-year-old, I see clients all over the state of Oregon, so this is not Eugene, and I'm not giving up any identifying characteristics, but I have a 15-year-old diagnosed with PTSD because of her fear of school. So I'm wondering if there's an effort to make it a public health policy to look at gun safety. I understand it's really hard in our state. There's a lot of contentious feelings about it. But we're talking about children's safety, and we're talking about public education. I have parents that are no longer sending their kids to public education.
And your question is?
And the question is it being looked at as a public health policy?
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll start off with a little bit for the public health policy. Some of the conversations that I've had with at least the lobbyists from NRA, it is talking about gun safety, getting back to where they were back in the 1920s and 1930s about gun safety, hunter safety. A lot of the issues, unfortunately, when juveniles and children have access, some of it's the irresponsibility of the adults, of not locking the guns up, of not teaching, not training. And I honestly, sitting here, I don't know how to change that for parental behavior. You can only do so much with laws and rules and regulations, but those are all going to take effect after the fact. If somebody is careless and leaves their gun lying on a counter and a juvenile gets a hold of it, anything that happens would be after that. I don't know how to solve that in the home issue before something tragic happens. I want to. I would love to be able to do that. One of the things I would love to be able to work on is trying to help the children before they get to that point where they want to actually grab that gun, before they actually want to pull the trigger on themselves, before they accidentally shoot a sibling. What can we do beforehand? And again, with our behavioral health and our mental health system, particularly with juveniles, with substance use disorder treatment, all those types of things, what can we do early on to teach the kids that that's a bad idea? That sometimes parents make bad decisions. You don't make a bad decision because of that. That's what I want to look at and focus on. I don't have a solution. I would love to find something like that that would work and that we could actually achieve some good things so that that isn't the highest cause of death for juveniles. Because I think that is something we can tackle. I just don't know personally how to do it.
And what I'll add, I talked about in the last question about the sort of steady progress we've made in the legislature on gun safety issues. The one bill, very important bill to this question that I didn't mention was the safe storage law that we passed in 2021. And we very much approached that bill from a public health perspective. And so that bill requires guns to be locked up if a person is, except in the cases where someone is home alone. And so I think that is an important piece to prevent access from young people to guns for accidental deaths or for the mass shootings that we're talking about. So I was very proud to support that bill in 2021. I do think when you look holistically at all of the things that the state of Oregon has done on gun safety, we have focused on the evidence-based ways to reduce gun violence in this state, passing policies about who has access to which kinds of firearms. And the other piece I'll just say really quickly is when the other pieces of House Bill 2005 were negotiated away in the compromise, we also said we need to invest more in gun violence prevention programs. There are programs across the state. There's a program in Portland called Healing Hurt People that when there has been a shooting, workers go to the hospital and meet with the victim and the families and try to interrupt that cycle of violence and prevent future crime, prevent future violence. And so those programs are very important in terms of there's the policies on gun safety, but also the person-to-person work on reducing interpersonal violence and reducing gun violence in the state are also critically important.
We have very little time. I'm going to ask you a yes or no question. I'm surprised that nobody asked a question about the walkout. Would you support a constitutional amendment to create a 50% plus one majority for a quorum?
Yes, I would support that. It's the law in 46 other states.
Charlie?
Possibly.
You're becoming a good politician. That's all the time we have for questions. This has been our July 14th conversation at City Club of Eugene with Representative Charlie Conrad of Oregon, House District 12, and House Majority Leader Julie Fahey of District 14. Please join me in thanking them for being here today. Please join us next week in a program on the March and the March of Civil Rights. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to seeing you back here next week.